welcome back to Gay by Gay. We are also, again, talking about daddy issues. This time it's Abby's turn, and I'd like to open it with asking Abby, what is your dad's name?
Dead. Okay, so this is a bit of a running joke. So to explain, yes, my dad is actually dead. So let's just get that out of the way. I'm pretty sure most of you have probably figured that out by now just from the way I talk about my dad. Yes, he has passed away. The reason for this joke, I have been teaching dance for many years, and there was a day that Aliyah and I were, I was teaching, and she was just kind of helping me keep an eye on one of our younger classes, because, a lot of little kids running around can often lead to problems.
Yes.
So I had Aliyah just kind of keeping an eye on a bunch of the kids. And one of the little ones had asked me, Miss Abby, what's your dad's name? And, Aliyah had just found out, earlier that day that my dad had actually passed away. She hadn't known that beforehand. And so without thinking, she turns around and answers this little girl's question with, dead. So it ended up being, Miss Abby, what's your dad's name? Dead.
Yeah.
And I remember,
a little kid.
And I remember sitting there at the time, and I just remember thinking to myself, Aliyah, they asked about his name, not his medical condition.
Dead. Well, in my mind, I was young, and I was like, do not talk about this. I will hurt Abby if I talk about this. Everyone has to know now.
Yeah, everyone needs to know. Everyone needs to know so that no one inadvertently hurts my feelings. But, yeah. So, my daddy issues.
His name is actually David,
His
not
name is,
dead.
His name is not dead. That's his medical condition. No, his name is David. He was actually a great dad, if I'm really honest. So it kind of bums me out that I have as many daddy issues as I've got, because he was an amazing father. When I was younger, he was really kind of like an idyllic dad to some extent. He would take us to the beach. He would play with us. How dads, I guess, sometimes get on the floor with their little kids. And, we used to call it playing tickle, where, we used to jump on his back and pretend that he was a horse or whatever. You know what I mean? Just the way little kids do. That's my memory of my dad.
Yeah.
And oh man, was he smart. And oh man, did he love kids. I think I actually, as much as my mom loves kids too, I think I got my love of kids and my teachability very much from my dad. Because for those of you who have heard me talk about this before, I call all of my dancers my kids. That's just how I refer to them. And I actually picked that up because my dad was a severe weather meteorologist. And he, at one point, ended up, instead of doing all of the sort of main meteorological stuff, he ended up becoming a teacher himself. And he always referred to his students as his kids. It's actually where I picked up on the habit from.
Yeah.
So to explain, yes, my dad is not here anymore. He died when I was, I guess, 13. I would have been grade 9 when he passed, January 21st, 2011. Unfortunately, he had brain cancer, and he survived a good long while with it, actually.
A long while.
A long while.
I mean, he was only supposed to survive for 6 weeks.
6 weeks, actually, initially, when he, unfortunately, too, we were actually down in the States on a road trip when he was diagnosed. So, yeah, that medical bill came in big and large and looming. I would have probably been 7 at the time. Yeah, I would have been grade 3 going into grade 4. So I think I was 7, just about to turn 8 at the time, and it was in August. And, everything was fine. We were on this road trip, and my dad woke up one morning, and he found that he couldn't grab anything without it just falling right out of his hands. And, right away we knew something was wrong. So Mom rushed him to a hospital down in the city that we were in. And I really don't have a lot of memories of this. I remember sitting in the waiting room, not really knowing why we were there even. And I remember just watching cartoons on the TV in the kids area. You know what I mean? I really don't remember any of what was going on. And at one point, it got late enough. They weren't done testing, but my mom felt bad that my sister and I had been at the hospital all day.
Yeah.
So she had said to my dad, look, David, I'm going to take the girls back to the hotel and, get them some food and everything else, because this is no place for little kids. Because,
at all.
I would have been about 7. My sister would have been about 9. So it was too much for us.
Yeah.
So my mom had taken us back to the hotel, and my dad finished up the tests on his own. And I guess at one point he had called my mom and said, okay, I'm done at the hospital. And Mama said, okay, well, what's the news? And my dad had said, I'm going to walk back to the hotel. And my mom said, David, that's ridiculous. I'm going to come get you. And he said, no, I need to walk back to the hotel. I need some time.
Yeah.
And so he walked partway back to the hotel, but of course my mom found him on the way because she was like, I'm not going to let my husband walk in a strange city. Like, what the hell, after he's been at the hospital all day and I don't know what's going on. So she ended up picking him up partway there, and my mom told me that it was a mostly silent car ride, and she had said, David, what is going on? And I guess eventually he just looked at her and said, Tracy, I've already got a plane ticket. I am flying back to our home city tomorrow for brain surgery. They've diagnosed me with brain cancer, and they said I have about 6 weeks to live. And, you know, obviously there were many tears. There was a lot of shock because it had just kind of come out of nowhere.
It was just out of nowhere. Yeah.
And there was nothing wrong until the day he was diagnosed. And, you know, no one could tell us how long it had been there. No one could tell us how long it had been growing. So literally the next day, my dad was on a plane heading back to our home city, getting ready for, you know, literally brain surgery where you sit awake in the chair while they're poking around in your brain. Actually, we have a film of it on a side note.
Oh my gosh.
I have seen the film of it. You wouldn't believe the brain is not actually pink. It's only pink on the inside. It's actually gray on the outside. But anyway, it's weird. But yeah,
I can't believe you saw that.
Yeah, I've seen my dad's brain. It's weird. Try explaining that to random people. Why do you have daddy issues? I've seen his brain.
I think the little bits I know about your dad, I think he would have wanted that.
Yeah, my dad was a bit of a strange one.
So what did you learn from that, Abby?
that would have been his reaction. But no, so unfortunately, we obviously cut the family vacation short, and
Really?
we immediately started on our way back because at the time, my mom, we had the family car with us, so we couldn't just fly back with them, so we had to drive back in a real hurry. And I remember really not understanding what was going on. And, you know, I remember my mom was crying in the front seat and my sister was crying in the front seat. So I was crying in the back seat. And I remember asking, what's going on? And my sister, bless her loving soul, whips around, looks me dead in the eye and goes, Dad's dying, you fucking idiot. And I just start wailing in the back, and all I remember
reason she's crying.
All I remember is my mom saying, Jesus Christ, Shannon. So, yeah, that's how I found out my dad had brain cancer, by my sister calling me a fucking moron and telling me that he was going to die.
Great.
We love siblings.
We love a sibling here on Gay by Gay. We love a sibling.
Yes.
But, yeah, so he had a level 4. He had a level 4 glioblastoma, which, you know, it was right in the middle of his motor control center and his speech control center. Mm-hmm. So, he ended up going for brain surgery, and they said that they thought they removed most of it, but there was no way to guarantee. Yeah. So, you know, I remember a lot of chemo, a lot of radiation. I remember he was a part of a whole bunch of trials and everything else where he used to have to inject himself 3 times a day with this mysterious medication that we didn't even know what it was because, you know, it was part of the trial because, you know, we didn't even know if he had the medication or if he had the placebo to see, you know, if it was all a mental effect or whatever, because that's how scientific trials go. So we don't even know to this day if he actually got any sort of medical treatment or if he was literally just injecting saline solution. We don't know. But unfortunately, with the cancer, it went into remission for a little while, but unfortunately it did come back, and, you know, he ended up going for a second brain surgery. Unfortunately, it grew back after that as well. But again, at the time, they'd only given him about 6 weeks. He lived for about 7 years.
Yeah.
He lived for quite a while. But the cancer itself did a lot to him. He very much changed from the dad that I knew to someone I could not recognize anymore. And, you know, it became one of those things where, honestly, it kind of feels like back then it was kind of like COVID in a way where, you know, my sister and I could not have friends over because
washing your hands.
We were constantly washing our hands. We were not allowed to have friends over. My dad lived on one floor of the house, and my sister, my mom, and I basically lived on the other floors.
Yeah.
You know, we could not go into his room because we could not touch anything in there. You know, there were a lot of times where, you know, I would ask, can I go to a friend's house? And the answer was no, because your dad's not feeling well. And, you know, it was common knowledge for me as a kid growing up that if I had a cold or something, I could not go near my dad because I could literally kill him.
Yeah.
It was something that I was always aware of and always conscious of. And, I do think that it affected me and my sister quite a lot because, we were very isolated from kids our own age because kids would want to hang out and my sister and I would have to look at them and say, no, we can't. So unfortunately, a lot of kids started to leave us out of a lot of activities. So my sister and I became quite reclusive. We read a lot of books. At the time, my sister and I fought like cats and dogs. We still fight like cats and dogs. So we didn't even really socialize with each other. So it was a lot of time with my sister and I just literally having to stay isolated, especially because, there were a lot of nights that we would go home for dinner, but my mom would have to literally be helping to feed my dad. So, my sister and I would be sitting at the table alone. We would be responsible for making our own meals and stuff. And, for me, being 8 years old, my sister being only about 10 years old, obviously, I think it's where a lot of my bad eating habits came from because I could not cook a lot at the time, obviously. So it was a lot of cereal and bagels and toast and just stuff like that because, my dad, went through times where he had a huge appetite and times where he had no appetite. And so, my mom would have to try and help him. And, of course, he would be isolated in his room where he was the safest, so she would be up there. So it would just be me and my sister on my own. And, it did absolutely make it very difficult. There were a lot of things that my sister and I had to miss out on. But, I don't begrudge my mom or dad at all because at the same time, they were both very understanding and they very much wanted to try and be there for Shannon and I. Like, I remember there were times that my mom would drop everything to come to our band concert or our choir concerts. Like, she tried her absolute hardest. And I can, now looking at it through the eyes of an adult, I can only imagine what she must have been going through trying to balance 2 young kids and, a terminally ill husband. Like, it must have been a complete nightmare for her. But, he passed away when I was in grade 9. I was about 13, as I said. It was very difficult because we had kind of known that things were going downhill very quickly because we had already observed that his kidneys were starting to shut down before he even went into palliative care, which is basically end-of-life care, which already was very hard. Watching the paramedics come to wheel him out of the house, knowing that he would never return, was one of the hardest things that I remember having to go through. But, I remember on this last day, I'd had this very strong urge, and I remembered looking at my mom that day and saying, I need to go and see Dad. I need to go and see Dad. Yeah. So we went up to palliative care to go and see him. And at that point, he was very incoherent, unfortunately. The tumor had grown to the point where it was doing terrible things to his brain. Yeah. So he was in constant pain with constant headaches. And I just remember this one blindingly clear moment where I'd been holding his hand and we had called for the nurse to administer more morphine because he was in a lot of pain. And I just remember looking down at him and I remember saying, Dad, I love you. And it was one of the last clear moments he had where he just kind of nodded and said, I love you too. Because his speech was very broken up at that point. Like, he could not speak. And that was very hard because my dad was he was a lot like me, very well-spoken, very articulate. He was a teacher type. So for him to have speech issues was very hard for him.
And just,
But those were his last words. And my mom and I went home, and less than an hour later, we got the phone call that he had passed away. And I remember something that still haunts me is just this idea that the last thing he ever saw was me walking away. That haunts me, just knowing, like, that bothers me a lot. So, it was a rough situation, and none of that is what caused the daddy issues, though. I think what caused the daddy issues was what the drugs and the chemotherapy did to him because he changed into a very different person. He had always been somewhat impulsive. And the unfortunate part about some of the drugs he was taking, such as dexamethasone, any of those steroid-type drugs, is that they kind of lower your inhibitions and they lower your ability to self-monitor behavior.
Like he was your dad, but not really your dad.
Yeah, he became very explosive. His temperament was very explosive. I remember there was one time where he had pushed my mom onto the stairs, and my sister was a little bit older than me, and she had tried to get in between them, and he had her pinned up to the wall with his hand around her neck, and it was a nightmare scenario. And I remember, like, 20 minutes later, him sitting on the floor, and my dad never cried. I remember him sitting on the floor and sobbing because he could not control himself, and he was horrified by what he was doing, but he felt powerless to stop it. So I think that's where a lot of my daddy issues come from, just seeing someone who was so articulate and so well-spoken and so, as I said, he was always impulsive but never violent. Seeing him change into this whole other person that I didn't recognize, it was very, very hard for me. So it's just a lot of those memories, and, the explosive temperament where, he would try to help me with my homework or something, and I would just make an off comment saying, oh, this is how the teacher wants us to do it, and he would just go off on me, and, it wasn't something he could control, and yet trying to explain that to me when I was 10 or 11 years old, how do you explain that to a 10-year-old? Your dad can't help but, explode on you. Like, it was not a good situation. So I think that's actually what caused the most damage. But to this day, I very much love my dad. He was an amazing dad while he was around. And as I've told everyone else, I feel like, not that I don't have daddy issues, or not that they're not as valid as everyone else's, but I feel like they're not as bad, because I have always known that my dad has always loved me. He didn't want to leave me. It wasn't something that he did. It wasn't a case of...
It wasn't his fault. It wasn't anything.
Exactly. It it's not that he didn't want us anymore. It's not that he didn't want to be around anymore. It's not that he wanted to move on and have a different life. He had no choice in what happened.
He didn't want to be temperamental. He didn't want to treat you guys that way. It was
exactly.
Just got in the way of what he had, his medical
Exactly.
condition.
And it was very difficult.
Yeah.
But, I can't blame him. And I think in some ways that kind of makes things harder, because I can't blame anybody.
Yeah.
But that means that I don't really have an outlet for some of those feelings, because if I can't blame but can you really blame cancer? It's just a bunch of cells that are growing too rapidly in a lot of cases. So there was no one to blame except circumstances, and you can't just rage about that, because you're never going to move on.
You can't confront anyone or anything.
Exactly. So that's left me with a lot of unresolved, issues, and in some cases trauma, just from some of the things that I remember witnessing. But, as I said, I still love him dearly, and, I don't hold any of that against him. And I think it's hard, because I think my way of coping with what happened is actually through humor and comedy, because that's my style. I remember... I took about 2 weeks off of school after my dad had passed, because I needed the time.
Yeah, well, everyone needs that.
Yeah, it was rough, but 2 weeks after I'd gone back to school, and I'd been sitting at the lunch table with a couple of my friends, and one of my friends, who also had daddy issues, ironically, had mentioned that, she hadn't seen her dad in a while, and, she was stressed out because he was coming to get her for a weekend visit, and she had looked across the table at me and said, the last time I saw my dad was actually at a funeral. And, I could see the horror in her eyes as she realized what she had said to me, going, oh my God, Abby's dad just died, and I just admitted that the last time I saw my dad was at, like, a family member's funeral. And I just remember looking up at her and going, yeah, that's the last time I saw my dad, too. And she looked horrified, but I just remember sitting there laughing, and all I could think was, oh my God, Dad would have thought that was hilarious. Just the whole concept of, the last time I saw my dad was at a funeral. Yeah, it's the last time I saw my dad, too.
Probably just like, hilarious, Abby. Hilarious.
I thought it was funny. She looked horrified. But again, that was my way of coping because, in a lot of cases, as I say, it's laugh or cry.
Yeah.
So, I could have either sat there and gone, how could you say that to me? Or I could sit there and make a joke about it and sit there and go, yeah, Dad would have thought that was fucking hilarious.
I mean, like, how many times did we go up to the cottage where Aliyah was like, Abby, why'd you leave your dad in the room with me?
So to explain, yes, my dad did choose to get cremated, and his remains are actually kept up at our family cottage. And it is something that Aliyah brings up every time we go up to my family cottage, because she will see the urn and go, Abby, why is your dad staring at me?
No, I have spent a disproportionate amount of time with that urn.
With my dad's ashes.
Well, I had to sleep in the room with his urn in it. And I'm like, I feel so bad. Like when that was when I first met Alex, too, so.
Yeah.
I was,
There's Abby's dad.
There's her dad in the urn. It's a nice urn, to be fair.
Oh my God.
It is a nice urn.
The first time I ever went up there, because his urn is on like this dresser thing.
It's kind of on. It houses like a really, really, really old record player in there.
And it's so his is in the middle. Then there's like this teapot thing, and then this other like cup thing. I don't remember. And I remember Abby's like, that's my dad's urn. And
so I just kind of point. There's my dad.
And then I'm like, the teapot? And she's like, no!
He is not in the teapot. No, he is not. He was in the urn.
And I was like, oh!
And
I was like 12 years old.
I think I really startled a lot of the girls because I am so blasé about it.
Yeah, there's my dad.
There's my dad. And, at one point, Mom goes, oh my gosh, we should probably move him. And so I was like, yeah, you're probably right. Come on, Dad, let's go for a walk.
That's the worst when you pick him up and you go, let's go, Dad.
Yeah, I just pick up the urn and everyone's like, oh my God, she's handling his ashes. And I'm like, well, yeah, he's dead. What's he going to care? But, I think it's actually given me weird feelings about death in and of itself. But that's a good topic. We'll talk about that on another podcast, how we feel about death.
Oh,
that'll be a fun conversation.
I'm scared,
I have a lot of jokes to make because my dad's dead and it gives me the right.
Oh God,
gives you the right.
So to end off the podcast, or at least this episode of the podcast, so my dad's name is Dad. No, I'm kidding. My dad's name is David. He died. He had cancer, and now I have daddy issues. Thanks for listening.
Take it gay by gay, guys.
Bye.